It begs the question, though, because we talked about this when he went down with injury, not knowing when he would come back, not knowing if it was going to be 6 games, which it ended up being, or if it was going to be a month to 6 weeks. Fortunately, it is on the front half of that week-to-week prognosis, and he is back in the lineup. But what we said, and specifically you said, I believe, was this is an opportunity for the Penguins to see what life without Pettersson would be if they chose to trade him this season. Did the defense's performance without him make you more or less confident in the Penguins potentially trading him at some point before the deadline here in a couple months?
Honestly, it's tough to say because while Pettersson was out, they were also missing Owen Pickering and Kris Letang for some of it. So it wasn't quite the perfect example of what would happen. However, it wasn't a terrible run. Obviously, they got good work out of Nate Clermont somehow, some way.
In one game, but yeah.
They liked what they saw from him in that contest, and they, I believe it was him that Sullivan said they brought him up because he's been playing well. Obviously, you're not going to call up someone who's not doing well, but it's they gave him the boost because he deserved it, and he went out in that contest and still showed what he could do and showed that he could be worth maybe a couple extra games if push came to shove and the lineup spots opened up for him. We didn't get to see the names like, Matt Call was playing in the Spangler Cup, so scratch that one. But we didn't get to see the names like Sebastian Aho get another chance or Philip Kral. And that's perfectly fine, but those are guys with NHL experience who break glass in case of emergency almost. You have those options. I think the Penguins learned that they can do it. They can perform on defense pretty well without Marcus Pettersson if that is the direction they're deciding to go in. One way or the other, it seems like this will be his last year in Pittsburgh because it really is either it's traded out or probably walk to free agency. We'll see how it goes. But the Penguins proved to themselves, at least in a 3-3 run, it's possible. It is not a traumatic downfall without him in the lineup. There is that whole what's it called? Can't remember now. But there is that whole going at it by association. Everyone's going to step up in the absence, and it is how you fill the hole that he's left. And it's something that the Penguins are going to have to do, I think. It's not, like I said, he's like Marcus Pettersson's not having the greatest season. So it kind of helps that, when you lose him to an injury, it's not to bash him, but it's like you're losing a ton at the moment. Thankfully, with short term, he's able to come back and build himself back up. The Penguins learned they can do stuff without him. I think that's sort of the big piece of it. And we'll see what happens going forward. I think, like I said, there are NHL names in that AHL lineup that's, if need be, they can also come back up and perform.
Yeah, I will say they didn't thrive without Marcus Pettersson. I don't think any of us expected them to, but they survived, and they did a little bit more, slightly more than surviving because, the penalty kill, which was the big marker for me, I said, I think that if the penalty kill struggles without him because he is your top penalty killing defenseman, that's a pretty glaring indication that you need him on that unit. But they went from 9th when he left the team to 7th by the time he returned. So they improved slightly in the top 10, not to mention the fact that their goals allowed per game played over those 6 games, again, a small sample size, were lower than the season average heading into that stretch. So 3.33 goals per game is not great, but still better than they had been doing throughout the season to that point. So again, surviving, not thriving without Marcus Pettersson. And I think the biggest thing that kind of cued me into, hey, they could actually do this during that stretch, because before that stretch, there was one thing that made me think, okay, it's going to be a little bit less of a heavy lift if they decide to do that and try to continue to vie for a playoff spot. And I'll get to that in a second. But Matt Grzelcyk, I thought, stepped up well with Erik Karlsson. The numbers underlying wise probably don't reflect it well, but considering where he was at whenever Pettersson got injured, let's not forget, he was very close to being dropped out of the lineup. He went from the first line and the first pair down to the third pair. The next step was out of the lineup. If it wasn't for his power play productivity, he probably would have been taken out of the lineup a lot sooner. But then the Pettersson injury happens. He's forced back up into the top 4, and he plays next to Erik Karlsson, something that all of us said, this is probably going to go absolutely horrendously. Well, maybe it's because Erik Karlsson has experienced probably his best stretch since joining the Penguins. Or maybe it's just because Matt Grzelcyk has elevated his game and it kind of woke him up. But that pairing has been better than expected. And whenever you consider Grzelcyk potentially being able to fill that role, and then you have Owen Pickering, who has emerged in general, it makes you feel a little bit more confident in the fact that, hey, they can trade Pettersson and not completely wave the white flag on this season.
Exactly. It was almost the way that you looked at Jake Guentzel last season. There were ways to, trade him away and get a good piece in return to Michael Bunting, but still kind of go for it. That wasn't the way everyone was viewing it. It really was more.
No, I think they were in a much different situation because they were not playing well at all. And I don't think anybody expected them to go for it by the time they traded Guentzel, because they looked like a team that was getting ready for a draft lottery selection, not a team that was getting ready for a push for the playoffs.
Correct. But thankfully they got a guy like Michael Bunting in return and made it look, on paper at least, more like a hockey trade, if you will. If the Penguins can find something like that with Pettersson, that good on them. It's doubtful, but we'll have to wait and see. And you know how, Matt, you can really see that Matt Grzelcyk has stepped his game up, considering Marcus Pettersson returned to the lineup, usually staple gunned to Erik Karlsson, and that wasn't the pairing. Marcus Pettersson came back and played with P.O. Joseph.
Yeah.
That should go pretty far in showing that, Matt Grzelcyk has stepped his game up and is playing pretty decently with Erik Karlsson, the guy no one can play with except for Marcus Pettersson. So, again, that shows the way Matt Grzelcyk has stepped up. If the Penguins decide that the best direction for Marcus Pettersson is to trade him, ideally, no matter what, if you are a Penguin fan or if you are an enjoyer of this team, you always want trades to be a hockey trade like the Jake Guentzel one, where, yeah, sure, you're losing a huge piece in Jake Guentzel, but you're getting, finally, he's a useful piece again, a guy like Michael Bunting in return, who has stepped his game up since the beginning of the season, who played really well last year after the trade, and it turned into what could be a key piece to this lineup going forward. Again, it's not apples to apples of a comparison here between Guentzel and Bunting, but if the Penguins can find a decent piece in return for Marcus Pettersson, suddenly it would have to be the kind of piece that is Michael Bunting, where it's just not working there, and maybe something revitalizes something in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that trade was kind of a mix because you have the future assets, you have the pieces that are going to help with the rebuild, but you had that little piece of instant gratification, an instant return with Michael Bunting. If you can get that for Pettersson, I think it appeases both sides of the fan base, because a large portion of the Penguins fan base is like, burn it down, get all the pieces for the future. If you're able to play the middle like he did, again, I know people were upset about the trade return because it didn't have a first round pick stapled to it, but when you look into it, you ended up with 3 very solid pieces, 2 that are pretty close to NHL ready, that are playing very well at the American Hockey League level in Ponomarev and Koivunen. And then you also have to add in the fact that second round pick turned into Harrison Brunick. So no matter if it's a first or a second, as long as your scouts do their job properly and you get the good piece, who cares that Harrison Brunick was a second round pick? Because when you look at first round picks, Sam Poulin hasn't turned into very much, and he was a first round pick. So look a little bit further beyond the title. But I agree with you, that little piece of instant gratification, that little piece of instant kind of feedback of, oh, we got Michael Bunting as well. So the futures, that's great. That was the intention of the trade. It's nice to have this as well. So maybe they can pull that off with Marcus Pettersson. The thing is, nobody is going to be a 1-for-1 replacement for Pettersson. Nobody that's currently in the organization, nobody that you're going to get back in the trade. And in that aspect, it is very similar to Guentzel, because nobody you brought in was ever going to be Jake Guentzel, particularly last year, this year, or next year. That just wasn't going to be the case. But the Penguins are still leaning into a rebuild here, and we have to have that sense of reality as we move forward. And I think that is what's going to kind of fuel Penguins fans, is knowing that, hey, Grzelcyk on a 1-year deal has been bad for most of the season, but he stepped up and showed he can play with Karlsson. Owen Pickering has stepped up and showed he can handle 20-plus minutes a night, despite the fact that he had no NHL, no professional hockey experience besides a handful of games coming into this season. So that gives you a little bit of relief, knowing that, hey, This trade is still probably coming, but the Penguins can survive without Pettersson for the remainder of this season if it comes to it.